Welcome to the fourth week of Coaches Training. I know you've had some great topics and presenters at this point. Today we're going to talk about anxiety. What we're going to do is we're going to work to define anxiety. We're going to work to see how that kind of shows up in you. We're going to really begin to investigate how do we emotionally become mature in the face of anxiety, and then really how that impacts ourselves, how we manage ourselves, and then our coaching. And so we're gonna go through those topics today. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we do, I'd like to pray for us, and then we'll move forward. Lord, I just thank you that you show up on all kinds of ways, and you specifically show up in the places where we become most anxious, because it's in that place that you bring peace and courage, and you allow us to take risks that are often beyond ourselves. And so, Lord, we just we expect that you're going to teach us, that you're going to show us incredible things through this process. So thank you for being in the midst of this with us. We love you. Amen. So what is anxiety? There's a lot of ways to define anxiety. I know when it shows up. I know what that looks like for me, how I begin to act and feel and all that. But let's just kind of get clear on a definition. It's basically the mind's and body's reaction to threat. So at this point, you understand your vows. You see where those things are getting triggered. You become anxious and you begin to respond because you feel a threat. And that's anxiety. That's showing up in you. And so that's how we want to define anxiety today. It's the mind's and body's response to threat. And so you'll see that mentally, emotionally, but you also see it physically in you. So we just want to make that clear. There's a couple of different types of anxiety that kind of show up over time in us. One is acute anxiety. Acute anxiety is pretty natural. You know, when your child runs into the street, you get anxious, it grows in you, you respond out of that circumstance. It's acute anxiety, and it's just really God's way of helping us to deal with specific circumstances as they hit us. Acute anxiety is really good, not anything to be afraid of. However, that can show up in some interesting ways as we, if we're not aware of that in our lives. If we enter into autopilot and we are just responding without recognizing the acute anxiety as it shows up, then we may need to be more aware of that. The other piece is chronic anxiety. It's just kind of this level of anxiety that always kind of exists, and it ebbs and flows based on kind of our emotional state. So there's a physical anxiety that we run to. We want to save somebody, we want to help somebody. We know that something's wrong, and it's very acute related to circumstance. There's chronic anxiety based on all the things that get stirred up in our life, based on our past experiences, based on our current reality, based on our vows getting triggered. And that chronic anxiety that's there, we need to recognize, because it'll ebb and flow, and it'll cause us to respond in ways that may help or hinder our relationships as we grow and seek transformation in our lives and the lives of people around us. And so that's really important to understand the distinction between those two, because then you begin to understand how to manage that, how to deal with that, how to coach different people through those different scenarios as they come up. So acute anxiety, chronic anxiety. There you go. Anxiety is just the stirred upness. When you get stirred up, it's just kind of I don't even know if that's a word, stirred upness, but that's kind of, when you get stirred up, you know, and you recognize, and it's important to see that and what that does to us physically, mentally, and emotionally. It makes us stupid. It makes us unaware of how to mentally address an issue in a way that is intelligent in some ways. As our anxiety levels raise, our thinking lowers. As our anxiety level goes up, and we forget what we're thinking about, we forget to attack that in a logical way, and sometimes we make some pretty dumb decisions, don't we? You know, we make decisions that may not be healthy for our lives, may not be healthy for the lives of people around us. It's just really good to understand that that's what anxiety can do to us as it raises up. It kind of makes us stupid, you know. Anxiety, it's contagious. So if you just imagine yourself in the midst of this system, and if you walk into a room and you're already worked up, let's say it's you're wearing something you don't really feel comfortable wearing, and you're showing up at an event that you don't really feel comfortable being at because everyone's kind of looking at you, or you have to put on airs or to promote yourself or others in a way that you're uncomfortable, man, that anxiety in you will spread throughout that entire room. And just to recognize that anxiety spreads. It's contagious. In the Bowen theory that you probably will be reading through, you'll see that it's not only true for humans, it's true for animals. I mean, you know, one cow that gets afraid and freaked out because the electric fence may just jump and cause all kinds of havoc, and the rest of the herd will. And then eventually you'll see the herd across the street will become anxious. So it's present in all beings that anxiety is it's contagious. It moves through the system. So how do we deal with that? How does it show up? What does that specifically look like? Let's talk about those things and how that shows up. It shows up in 4 ways. We'll break them down, and I just want to give you the 4 ways right now. Conflict. Anxiety shows up huge in conflict, doesn't it? In distance, as we create distance in relationships, it shows up in how we function in relationships. We can overfunction or underfunction. It also shows up in how we project ourselves on others and the expectations we have with other people in our lives, and we're putting things on them. So let's break those things down. Let's look at kind of how that looks, because see, acute anxiety is very predictable. It's based on that situation like we talked about. But chronic anxiety, not so predictable. You know, those valves get triggered and you begin to sit in that autopilot and you begin to respond. Your thinking goes down, your emotions and your anxiety goes up. Less predictable. You got to be able to see those things. And so conflict, you got to win. You don't want to be wrong. You want to be right. So when we sit in that right and wrong thinking, we got to win, we got to be right, conflict presents itself, all of a sudden this anxiety raises up, and it says something about who we are. We press in, and we press in, and we fight because we want to win. You can see that, how that anxiety causes that tension there and can even grow conflict. It can grow conflict. The resulting conflict, let me just read this for you. It says that just making conflict go away just drives the anxiety underground. So the idea is not just to not have conflict, to avoid conflict, because the anxiety still exists. And so the idea is not just to not have conflict in our lives, to not tell the truth, to not be transparent with each other, to present our looking good presence in front of others, at least not as bad as a person sitting next to us, right? It's not the idea is to not just avoid all of that for the sake of avoiding conflict. The idea is to recognize the anxiety that's producing and deepening that conflict there. And where is that coming from? So the conflict's not the symptom, it's the problem. And you got to figure that. You got to figure out that anxiety is where you can see that problem exist. Distance. This is a really normal one. We all do that. It's kind of fight or flight. When we see that anxiety exists in relationship and there's this tension that's right there, all of a sudden we're either going to deal with it and we're going to press in, or we're going to create distance. And you see that show up, that anxiety show up in you when you say, I don't want to talk to them anymore. I remember whenever I was going through 201, I had a lot of anxiety about talking to my dad, about some things that have happened in the past and that were continue to happen. It was really hurtful for me, but really I didn't want to continue to hurt my dad. And so that there was this tension in that relationship. And so I had all of this anxiety about talking to him and telling the truth. As a matter of fact, when I was around him, I wouldn't tell the truth and I wouldn't act according to my core values of who I was. I was actually just trying to make him happy, please him, and keep it safe. And what happened is I began to develop some distance. And I remember with my coach, I said, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And I had such a great coach. He just asks me why. Why don't you want to talk about this? Press in. And see, because what he knew and what I know and that what we all know is that distance does not bring transformation, does not bring healthy relationships, but as a matter of fact, that anxiety there is getting in the way of all that to take place. And so what we do is we create distance. And it's interesting because as believers, as Christians, as people who follow Jesus, it feels nice. It feels like the right thing to do. Let's not address that. Let's not upset the apple cart. Let's not do all of that. It's the nice thing. But cut off is never an option for a Christian. To cut off relationships is never an option for the Christian, since we're always called to at least pray for our enemies. We're always called to at least enter in somehow relationally to stay connected, even though there's a difference in how we see things. We have to stay connected. And so distance is huge when you see anxiety show up, when there's distance that's being created. The third thing we talked about, I said earlier, was over-functioning or under-functioning. And I don't think, as a parent, I don't know anything about this, right? You know, man, I want my kids to look good, so I'm going to over-function in front of people, or, you know, my wife's got it, so I'm just going to sit back. I'm tired. It's the end of the day. You know what? It's not my role right now. It's not what I want to do. I have some anxiety about what it's going to be like at home, and so I just shut down and I under-function or over-function. And so let's just look at that and look at those things for a second. Over-functioning means taking too much responsibility. Taking on things that really aren't even yours to take on. Because remember, we talk about looking good, not looking bad. We're talking about winning or being right. If we live in that, we can tend to overfunction because we can tend to take on things because we want our environment and where we live to act and be and live in a certain way. And so that anxiety raises up, our valves get triggered, and all of a sudden we overfunction to create the space that works for us. And we forget the impact that that has on the rest of the system, because anxiety is what? Contagious. It's totally contagious. And so overfunction is taking too much responsibility for the relationship. Underfunctioning means not taking enough. So to stop, assess where you are in the responsibility, where that responsibility belongs. Does it belong with me? Does it belong with them? Who needs to take that on? And begin to have really good conversations. And so as you coach, when you see that show up, you see someone as a parent or as an individual in a relationship or as a boss in a workplace or a co-laborer in ministry and on mission, as people develop their missional communities, as a coach, when you see over-functioning or under-functioning, you want that to be addressed, because that's just an understanding that there is anxiety present and these valves are getting triggered and there's something happening there that needs to be addressed. And if it's not, it will damage and hinder the transformation process. And so we want to see that over-functioning or under-functioning, taking on too much responsibility or not enough responsibility. And then the last thing, well, let me just say one more thing about that. I got some notes here I wanted to say. The over-functioner usually looks like a great Christian, right? You take on all this stuff and you're the hero on mission, gets lots of affirmation, while the disapproval is reserved for the underfunctioner. Lazy, slacker. However, both are equally autopilot. Both are equally lack the ability to address what's really going on, the anxiety that's very much present, the valves that are getting triggered, and the anxiety that takes place that causes that over-functioning or under-functioning to take place. I used to be on staff at churches. I work for an international nonprofit now, and that is really, really a great thing to notice. You know, pastors a lot of times overfunction. You know, they take on so much, and what happens is the congregation tends to underfunction because they see the paid professional doing all the work, happily, joyfully, on mission. But how do we develop missional communities, and how do we develop groups of people, and how do we stay connected in our relationships in a way that we're telling the truth, that we're honest, and that we participate and take on what's really ours to take on? The last thing, projection. So let's look at that. The common form of projections, triangles. We develop these triangles, so we might get in the middle and bring someone else in the middle of conflict or in the middle of relationships and kind of go, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? And all of a sudden there's this triangle created instead of telling the individuals to go talk to one another. Go work this out. And in the midst of those triangles, what we do is we relieve anxiety between two people by triangling in a third person to gossip. And so we make this person feel good, we make me feel good, but then all of a sudden that anxiety is projected on the third individual, because now they're in the middle of relationships that they never wanted to be in the middle of in the first place, because the two individuals didn't take it on themselves. They projected it on another individual. So de-triangling by talking to each person about that person's stuff, not about the other individual. So you can de-triangle by making it personal, keeping it back on the individual, not allowing that projection to take place. That's really diagnosing and blaming. We all mean well with that, and we all want to get to the issues, but you gotta see that projection taking place is not really addressing what's really there in the individuals and in the relationship. So we looked at these 4 things: conflict, distance, overfunctioning, underfunctioning. We looked at projection. I just want to tell a quick story about all of that. I work all day and coming home, and one of the things I used to do when I came home is I would be so worked up from my day, all these meetings and people and things that I was involved with throughout the day, and I just expected when I walked in the door that everyone in the house was going to be ready to hear and serve and take care of everything I need. I was going to plop down. This was a place of refuge. I mean, after all, everyone had been hanging out all day. I mean, I've been working. But what happened was all the anxiety that I had, I projected onto someone else. My wife, namely, or my kids. If they didn't operate the way I wanted them to, I got mad at them. And then I bring my wife involved and I say, man, if you could just remember when I come home, man, have these kids ready for dinner, have these, and I began to work the system, and it all was about me and my anxiety. But what I found was I was free of anxiety. Now all of them got, because anxiety is it's contagious. Well, then we decided, how about, my wife and I decided, how about we have a conversation on the way home? Well, I found that even in that conversation, I was getting more worked up about my day. And in that conversation, she was distracted in a conversation with me, and the kids were getting more loud and disruptive. She was getting anxious, and now her anxiety was projected on me through the phone and say, if you would hurry up and get home, if you would get here, you can help me. This is the hardest part of the day. Let's have this conversation, and it would work. I'm trying to cook dinner, and all of a sudden the anxiety was passing through the system. So you can see how this is all working out. And we've had to come and really had some hard conversations about owning what's ours, not taking too much responsibility for what the other individuals, not triangling our kids in the midst of our relationship, dealing with it, having these conversations, and begin to say, why are we so anxious? What is causing all of this anxiety? And we just came to the point where let's not address it, but let's address it at an appropriate time when we're ready. We're ready to talk about that, when we're not defensive, when we're not going to cut each other off, when we're not going to try to take on each other's anxiety. So it was really, really good to see this for us, and it's really been helpful as we relate to our kids. So let's get into emotional maturity in light of that. The ability to define myself, saying I think, I feel, and choose what to, while allowing you to define yourself by saying what you think, and so allowing the individuals in the relationship to say, for me, this is the way it is, and for you, this is the way it is, and not take it on as, so you're saying this about me, or I'm saying this about you, and having the emotional maturity to be able to express what's yours and allowing the other individual to express what's theirs. That is a huge, huge step. I mean, one of the things that Jim has said that I really took on was the key to transformation is understanding your impact on others. When you understand that, you stop seeing others' impact on you and you see your impact on others, transformation can happen. And this is so true with this anxiety deal. You begin to see where you are getting anxious, where you are taking on these things, where you are participating in this relationship in a way that is causing some of these things to exist. Allowing others to speak into that. The ability to know and do the right thing in the face of pressure to do otherwise. There's pressure in you internally, externally, to just function in a way that you know is inappropriate, unhealthy, just not the way in which, in the core of who you are, you want to function. In that pressure, function in the way that you know that you should. And that's a huge step in emotional maturity. The ability to stay connected to other people without having our feelings or actions determined by them. So they can see it different than me, if they handle it different than me, to be able to express my anxiety. One of the things that I found in all of this and that's really helped me is to get the anxiety out in the room. Stop trying to push it down, keep it under, keep it hidden, and act as if I've got it all together. Just express it. Just say it. And then the load is lifted off. And you can begin to live into what you need to live into in that relationship with the individuals. And allowing them to do the same. That's huge. It's huge. So how do we manage ourselves? That's one way we can do that. We can learn to step away and observe what's going on. Not feel like we have to address it all right then. Step away, take a break. We can calm ourselves physically and emotionally. We can be a calming presence. We can learn kind of physically what happens. For me, it feels like my stomach won't just stop shivering. It feels like I got the shivers when I'm really anxious about something. I'm in a meeting, or I might have to talk to my spouse or someone I really love and connected to about something that feels really hard to talk about. I get all this anxiety because one of my vows is I don't want to fail or be a part of anything that fails. And so if I have to admit that something I did was hurtful or not be perceived as right or good, I get really anxious because I don't want to fail. I don't want to be perceived as a bad husband or a failing father or a friend that's not good. And so that, man, I get stirred up and I get the shivers and it comes out, I feel cold, but it's really all of my anxiety. That's a physical representation. So how do I calm myself? Maybe take a step back. Just breathe. Allow yourself to be in the moment and physically and emotionally really connect in with what's going on with you. Get coaching. Get outside perspective. Tell somebody, hey, this is happening. This is what I think I should do. The thing that's been most helpful for me is in the coaching relationship, having someone that allows me to go through the entire conversation. It's kind of like a little role play. That's been so helpful because I get to see where my anxiety is coming up, where I'm shifting blame, where I'm over-functioning, where I'm creating potentially more conflict in the relationship. And the coach just helps me so much to see, hey, what if you said it this way, or what if you said, and they really play into the role, and it's really helpful to see what maybe I couldn't see before. So get a coach. Get a coach. The last thing is use spiritual disciplines. You know, that daily workout that we talk about, and that in coaching you'll ask your coachee every time you talk, have you done? How's the daily workout going? Have you done the homework? All of those things. Really press it in. Well, one of the things to stay in integrity in the coaching is to be involved in that with yourself and be really transparent about how that's going on with you. Stay connected to your daily workout. Be involved in those practices, those spiritual practices, and gain insight and intimacy and connection with the Lord. One of my most favorite verses is in the Psalm that says, taste and see that the Lord is good, and blessed are you when you find refuge in Him. Refuge is an awesome word for me, especially when I'm anxious. I need a place that's safe, that's helpful, that helps me see what I don't see, and it's a refuge. It's comforting, and I know that I'm loved no matter what. And in those moments, I can taste and see that the Lord is good. And that will refuel and propel me into the places I need to go with my relationships with others, and help me see my anxiety and it being present. So that's another way to manage your anxiety. So let's kind of wrap all of this up and see how this is important to coaching. Why is this concept so important? The concept of anxiety and emotional maturity is important to the process because coaching is inherently anxiety producing. Inherently, what we're doing as coaches is we're pushing people, well, I like to say it this way. I don't want to say it so harshly, I guess, but I say it's helping people to stay in action around the things that they've already committed to, because we know that action produces transformation. We know that. That's key, that's really critical. And if we can help people stay in action around the things that they've already committed to, that's so important. And in that, you're going to see anxiety. You're going to have to press people. You're going to have to ask hard questions. You're going to have to see and interact in a way that may feel uncomfortable, but it's really about helping others stay in action. It produces a ton of anxiety. A ton of anxiety. And that's what we do. And so you have to see that. Transformation comes when people are able to see their anxious reactivity and choose a different way of being. We contribute to that as coaches when we're able to model calm presence and connection to our own values. So we're modeling that. We have to see it in ourselves in order to be able to see it in others. That's why this is so important. That's why this topic is important. And when we're stopped, or when our coachees are stopped, it's certain that anxiety is part of the picture. So anytime you see someone stopped, you know that the anxiety levels are raising up, thinking's going down, their valves are getting triggered, and it's causing all of this disruption in them and in the systems in which they live. Really important to see. So it's a big topic. It's a lot to be discovered, so thanks for hanging with me for these few minutes. I know that you'll have some homework assignments related to this. I know that there will be some activities around kind of discussing this potentially with your coach and all of that. I hope that as you discover that, you really see some really amazing transformation take place in your relationship with the Lord and your relationship with others, and as you coach individuals through that as well. Thanks.